How did Bombay get leased for just £10? How the fate of this dream city slipped into the hands of the East India Company. Imagine this, 7 small islands scattered along the Arabian Sea, surrounded by salt, marshland, fishing settlements, a few forts, a few churches, some port value, and nowhere inside the shine of a great metropolis. Then one day, thousands of miles away, a king puts his signature on a document, and this land, which would one day become India's financial capital, passes into the hands of the East India Company. The price? Just a yearly rent of £10. At first hearing, the story sounds almost unbelievable. The fear begins right there. Could the fate of an entire city really change through such a small deal? And the curiosity is this: how did Bombay, which is now Mumbai, pass so easily into British hands? And what was the real game behind those £10? First, let us clear up one important point. People often get the year wrong in this story. The correct year is not 1688, but 1668. On the 27th of March 1668, through a royal charter, King Charles T handed Bombay over to the English East India Company on an annual rent of £10. That was the document that shifted Bombay from crown control to company control. Before that, Bombay had been under the English crown, and before that, it had belonged to the Portuguese. In other words, Bombay did not go directly into the company's hands. It passed through several political and imperial layers before it reached there. Now the question is, how did Bombay reach the British in the first place? The answer lies in the marriage politics of Europe. In 1661, England's Charles Taw married the Portuguese princess Catherine of Braganza. As part of that marriage alliance, England received certain trading rights along with Tangier and Bombay. Britannica clearly notes that Catherine's marriage gave England strategic ports like Bombay and Tangier. So Bombay did not reach the English crown as land won in battle, but as part of a royal dowry. That makes the story even more fascinating. The fate of an Indian port was decided by a royal marriage in Europe. But Bombay's story does not begin there. Long before that, in 1534, after the Treaty of Bassein, the Portuguese took control of Bassein and the 7 islands of Bombay from Gujarat's Sultan Bahadur Shah. Historical explainers and summaries on Portuguese-era Bombay note that this was the turning point from which Bombay's colonial future began. The Portuguese did not see these islands merely as a trading outpost. They also developed them through the lens of religion, military strategy, and maritime control. They built churches, erected forts, and made this region part of their wider Estado da India strategy. This was also the time when the colonial form of the city's name began to emerge. The Portuguese used different names for these islands, and later the name Bombay became common, which through English pronunciation and administrative use, turned into Bombay. Historical references to the 7 islands of Bombay show that this was not one continuous landmass, but a group of separate islands. Mahim, Parel, Mazagan, Worli, Bombay Island, Colaba, and Little Colaba. What we now see as seamless Mumbai was, at that time, a broken geography. That fragmented geography would later become the center of a much larger story of land reclamation and colonial engineering. Now, come back to Charles Tupu. He may have received Bombay in dowry, but actually taking possession of it was not easy. The local Portuguese authorities did not surrender control immediately or smoothly. There were administrative frictions, revenue disputes, and tensions related to port authority. Eventually, when the crown realized that managing Bombay directly was expensive and troublesome, it leased the territory to the East India Company. The real significance of the Royal Charter of the 27th of March 1668 lies here. It transformed Bombay from a royal trophy into a company asset. And that moment is considered the true beginning of the future commercial destiny of Mumbai. £10 per year sounds almost like a joke, but it was not merely a symbolic rent. Several historical summaries also mention that behind this transfer arrangement, the East India Company gave Charles II a loan of £50,000 at 6% interest. Historical explainers have noted this point as well. So this was not just a simple £10 lease story. The real meaning was that the crown got rid of a strategic burden, the company secured a valuable port, and the king received cash support in return. In other words, it was less a lease and more a financial political deal. And that is where the East India Company's real strategy becomes clear. The company did not want only spices, cloth, and trade. It wanted ports from which it could expand its maritime, military, and commercial influence along the western coast. Surat was its major base at the time, but Bombay's natural harbor was extremely strategic. Bombay could become a point in the Arabian Sea trade routes from which the company could secure safer anchorage, ship repair facilities, maritime control, and stronger influence over the politics of Western India. Later events proved that the company's thinking was not wrong. In 1687, it shifted its headquarters from Surat to Bombay, but Bombay could not be turned into a city through paperwork alone. It needed vision, administration, law and order, population, trade communities, and an urban plan. This is where the name 𝐼𝐸𝐴 enters the story. In 1669, the company made him governor of Bombay, and until his death in 1677, he guided the transformation of this scattered island cluster into an emerging city. Historical references say that he encouraged traders and artisans to move to Bombay, promoted religious tolerance, created administrative panchayats, established the first court, introduced a mint, and emphasized fortification. That was the phase when Bombay stopped being just leased territory and began becoming a planned colonial city. 𝐮𝐸𝐴's greatest strength was that he understood cities are not built by buildings alone, they are built by people. He offered incentives to traders, craftsmen, and communities from Gujarat, Konkan, and other regions to settle in Bombay. Later, Parsis, Jews, Davudi Boras, and other trading communities became an important part of Bombay's growth story. This migration was not accidental. It was part of deliberate colonial urban policy. The company wanted a port city that would not just be a military station, but also a commercial magnet. 𝐮𝐸𝐴 laid the foundation for exactly that kind of social engineering. Some historical notes also suggest that around 1661 Bombay's population was about 10,000, and within a few years it began rising rapidly. The exact numbers may vary from source to source, but the broad pattern is clear. During the early company decades, Bombay's population grew quickly. The reasons were trade opportunity, relative safety, port access, and colonial patronage. A port becomes a great city only when people begin tying their destiny to it. Bombay had begun doing exactly that. Of course, the journey was not easy. The Dutch were active in Arabian sea trade, Mughal naval pressure existed, and naval forces linked to Janjira also challenged Bombay. Historical references mention attacks on Bombay by Yaqut Khan or CD forces. That means one thing was already obvious. Bombay's rising value was visible to everyone. What first looked like a scattered cluster of islands was slowly becoming Western India's strategic prize. That is why Bombay's development was not only economic, but also part of a military contest. In 1687, when the company shifted its administrative center of gravity from Surat to Bombay, it became clear where it saw its future. Surat was powerful, established and wealthy, but Bombay was young, controllable, and rich in harbor advantages. The company wanted a base with less local political baggage and greater room for long-term expansion. Bombay turned out to be exactly that. The later rise of the Bombay Presidency was an extension of that same logic. Then, in the 18th and 19th centuries, Bombay's geography itself began to change. What was once a group of 7 islands slowly began to be joined through land reclamation projects. Historical references on the 7 islands of Bombay and Bombay's history note that extensive reclamation joined separate pieces of land into a growing urban mass. The Hornby-Vellard project played a decisive role in that. Its significance was not only engineering, it changed city expansion, transport patterns, settlement flows, and land value all at once. The modern physical form of Mumbai is the result of colonial intervention. Then came the transport revolution. On the 16th of April 1853, India's first passenger railway ran between Bombay and Thane. This was not just a railway line. It was a new artery of colonial capitalism. Port city, railway connectivity, and cotton trade. These three together linked Bombay to inland India. Now Bombay could draw wealth not only from the sea, but also from the hinterland. This was the point at which the city accelerated from a colonial port toward becoming a modern commercial metropolis. Later, this growth spread into industrial mills, finance, shipping, insurance, and stock market culture. During the American Civil War, Bombay benefited enormously from the cotton trade. When American cotton supply was disrupted, Bombay emerged as a major cotton export center that increased both the city's prestige and its wealth. During the 19th century, educational institutions, courts, municipal structures, and civic bodies also developed. In other words, the territory that had been leased to the East India Company grew into one of the most dynamic urban centers of British India. This was not the outcome of one single policy. It was the combined result of geography, empire, trade, migration, and infrastructure. But there is another side to this story that must not be forgotten. Bombay's rise was tied to colonialism, and colonialism did not mean development alone. It also meant power, exploitation, military control, unequal trade, and the weakening of local autonomy. The East India Company did not develop Bombay so that India could become prosperous. It did so because it increased the company's wealth, reach, and power. The city that today symbolizes opportunity was originally shaped by the commercial calculations of empire. That truth is bitter, but turning history into a romantic story does not change the truth. And yet, that irony is perhaps the greatest of all. A city that European powers valued for maritime rivalry, that was given in dowry, that was leased for an annual rent of £10, later also became one of the great stages from which Indian politics challenged colonial power. Dadabhai Naoroji, the Bombay Presidency Association, the Indian National Congress, all had deep ties to Bombay. So the city built by empire later also became a center of Indian political consciousness against empire. That is the real historical depth of Bombay. Today we know Mumbai as India's financial capital, film capital, port city, trading hub, startup magnet, stock market nerve center, and real estate powerhouse. But behind all of that lies a very strange beginning. 7 islands, colonial tug-of-war, a royal marriage, a £10 lease, a £50,000 loan, and the East India Company's long-term vision. That is why Mumbai's story is not just a story of urban growth. It is also a story of power transfer, geopolitical strategy, and historical accident. If that charter of 1668 had not been signed, if the company had not taken Bombay so seriously, if an administrator like 𝐼𝐸𝐻𝐸 had not arrived, perhaps South Asia's urban map today would have looked very different. So when we say that Bombay was given to the East India Company for just £10, the line may sound catchy, but it hides centuries of history inside it. That £10 was not just rent. It was the key to an imperial doorway. That key turned a port into a city into a presidency into a commercial engine, and eventually that same geography into modern Mumbai. Some dates in history do not merely sit on the calendar. They change the direction of the future. The 27th of March 1668 was one such date. And perhaps that is the biggest takeaway from this story. Sometimes the fate of a city is written on paper before it is written by its people. That is exactly what happened with Bombay. First came the charter, then the company, then the traders, then the communities, then the infrastructure, then the wealth, then the politics. And finally, one day Bombay became Mumbai. The name changed, the era changed, the rulers changed, but that lease of 1668 remains one of history's most astonishing urban stories. Because the direction of an entire dream city really was changed by a deal worth just £10 in annual rent. If this video has taught you something new, or if you feel this information should reach more people, don't forget to like and share the video. Your small share can become valuable and useful information for someone else. If you have any questions related to this topic, or if you would like to share your opinion with us, be sure to write in the comment box. We read every question and suggestion from you, because your feedback inspires us to create better content. And if you want to keep receiving such interesting and reliable information about business, the economy, and the world in the future, then don't forget to subscribe to our channel GRT Business and also press the bell icon so that you get notifications of every new video directly. At GRT Business, we always strive to provide you with accurate, balanced, and reliable information. Our news and analysis are prepared based on information obtained from various news agencies, public sources, and public opinion. We make every effort to verify and validate each fact as much as possible. But in case of any possible error or dispute, the responsibility lies with the respective sources. Our only aim is to present you with a correct and trustworthy perspective so that you can understand any topic better.